Hi, I'm Jason Gorber for ThatShelf.com, and we're here to talk about Peter Jackson's epic Lord of the Rings films.
Big shelf.
Now, when these came out, it's sort of difficult to remember for those that sort of came in late to the story, but we all kind of thought that these films would not necessarily work. Look, there's been lots of attempts to actually bring the Lord of the Rings story to the big screen. Rob actually obviously did an animated version that involved sort of a surreal mix of live action then rotoscoped into animation. We'd seen The Hobbit also done as an animated element that, kind of worked. But back then, the assumption was that something as big, as epic as The Lord of the Rings was just simply not going to be feasible to do on the big screen unless it involved a lot of animation and a lot of stuff that simply wasn't going to be photorealistic. All of that changed, of course, because of many films, but one in particular that sort of gets underlooked is the technology of something like Phantom Menace. Frankly, if you look at some of the visual effects that were actually taking place back then, the stuff that Industrial Light and Magic did to actually show the possibilities of what was involved in this kind of hybrid between model making and digital filmmaking, the integration of the two, it really encouraged, among other people, the special effects wizards at Weta in New Zealand to sort of up their game. And they developed all kinds of unique techniques in order to, again, create that hybrid. So many people look at the Lord of the Rings films as, the key computer effects elements that are certainly there. Now, there's also very much the practical effects, the swords, the beautiful armory. There's all kinds of people that have gone on about Richard Taylor and his crew as they put together stuff. The details they have, the ones that I always love, is that they actually had details on the inside of the armor so that only the actor who's actually putting it on would actually see it, and somehow it being closer to their chest, as it were, would somehow instill them as characters into something quite remarkable. But the big thing for me was, again, that integration, the ability to actually do things that were physical and also virtual. Their models were so giant, they called them bigatures. And again, very much what was done at that period, that sort of late 90s, early 2000s period of filmmaking, whereby you really finally got model making to a point where it truly could be spectacular if it could be augmented with computer graphic imagery that allowed them to take out certain things and augment certain things and change the sky and stuff like that. So you really created this hybrid between new and old techniques of special effects. Now, of course, none of this matters unless you have a really strong story. And obviously, J.R.R. Tolkien's epic has captivated people for decades and decades. Now, so many people actually take on the story of the Lord of the Rings and see it as this sort of weird piecemeal thing. And that's really how it was written. I mean, Tolkien himself, the philologist, had all these different elements that he was going to be sort of glomming on. Fundamentally, he was as interested in creating elven languages as he was in telling the story of the elves. He saw them very much as one and the same thing. So the narratives of Miz basically brought to life the linguistic elements that he had actually brought to bear, drawing on everything from ancient Norse, Anglo-Saxon details, Gaelic sections, other Eastern European elements, and even his experiences during the First World War and how that really elevated the storyline. Now, obviously, we know subsequently the Hobbit films came out of this, and that'll be a time for a whole nother video. But once we saw Lord of the Rings and sat in and realized that it had gone to, because back then, if I'm not mistaken, like The Hobbit, it was going to be 2 films and then stretched to 3. Actually, it might have been 1 film, then 2, then 3. A lot of us were very skeptical about how this was actually going to play out. And really what got me right away, the thing that I've always said is the best thing that Peter Jackson ever did, is the opening sequence, the sort of 10-minute, this is what goes on, this is the battle, this is who Sauron was, this is who the elves were fighting. along with men. Here's the sword that got broken, and here's the sort of backstory. It's essentially what, if you think about it, the Star Wars films did with the crawls. They sort of brought you into the film. But in this sequence, I don't know, 8-10 minutes, whatever it is, it feels like a mini movie, and it's frankly the part of Fellowship of the Ring that I've watched more than any. The sound design is insane. The actual battlefields are so glorious, and it gives a hint of the greater narrative, everything that was to actually take place. By doing that, as soon as I saw that, and you saw that glimpse of Gollum at the end with his precious, because again, by the first film, we weren't really sure what we're actually going to get out of this character. I felt really confident. Now, I had liked Peter Jackson a lot before. I'd seen many of his films. And I thought it was really interesting that you're going to get this guy taking this. But again, we'd seen so many times something like this, as somebody who's so close to the material, so passionate for the material, that it wasn't necessarily going to actually fly. And by the time we were done the first film, I couldn't wait for more. You actually have elements, again, in the Two Towers that are my favorite of the entire sequence. Obviously, the grand battle that takes place is sort of a touchstone. That's really what brought that from being 2 films to being 3. They spent so much time in the Helm's Deep battle. It's this dark, dreary, rainy sort of guts out battle between the men, the elves, and the Uruk-hai that completely plays cinematically, just gorgeously. It really sort of doubles down on so much of what Peter Jackson did in his early days, which are these like gutsy, gut-filled films. Again, he was a schlock filmmaker, God bless him, sort of an independent guy in New Zealand making things that were as shocking as they were entertaining and silly. And somehow he brings that all to bear here. It also has a moment, if I'm not mistaken, it is in the second film. They all sort of blend together in a beautiful way. The lighting of the flames on the hill. I'm now getting confused if it's the second or third film, but bear with me. It is my favorite part of the entire saga. And what it is for a moment where there's sort of signal flares of saying we're in trouble here and we're going to let the other cities know what is going on, that we're actually needing your assistance. As you can see why I believe it's the second film with the other city. The lighting of those flames takes place. This is gorgeous plate photography in New Zealand, which is so phenomenal, obviously, for the way that stuff gets made. The plate photography, and you see each sort of peak of these mountains light up. And it was in that moment. It's so stunning to me, because we've been living with this sort of small community, this group, this fellowship that's going along, and all the battles, and sort of all the generals, as it were. It's like all the big guys going on, and then you see a bunch of faceless people that sort of get caught in the wars. But at that moment on those mountaintops, you get a sense of the greater world. You get a sense that on each of those mountaintops is somebody living there, like a lighthouse keeper, literally a flame keeper, waiting for this moment. They have a story. Now, it might be a terribly interesting story, but nonetheless, they got there, they climbed the mountain, they were there, they were prepared. It's this tiny moment where you see suddenly this thing, which felt really big, suddenly get even bigger. It's not just the geography of it all, it's the logistics, it's the entire world is engaged in this sort of moment, and it's really, really quite stunning. It reminds me again, not to connect this too much with Star Wars, but my favorite moment in Rogue One, when they're handing off the plans at the end, spoiler, and again you have that moment that each of those characters who's on screen for maybe 10 seconds has such a critical role in everything that we know about. These flamekeepers, which seem such a minor thing, just some guy, probably some Weta technician, filmed against a green screen and plopped onto a mountain. But nonetheless, it was that moment that I truly got a sense of awe. It wasn't the giant battles, it wasn't the amazing costumes, it wasn't all that. It was that tiny, very human moment, for lack of a better word, that actually just showcased the enormity of it all. Now, these films have been on shiny disc, as it were, for many years. There was a beautiful DVD release, which was a regular release, and then they came out with the extended editions, which sort of came out actually before the films, because the films were many years apart. So you would get one film and then get the extended edition. And for me, the extended editions, yes, they're very, very long. but they also end up being definitive. Now, they're definitive in a couple ways. They aren't necessarily the best way. Aren't even necessarily the way that I would show somebody who's never seen the films before. But nonetheless, they feel both bloated and wonderful, which is very much the way that Peter Jackson sort of employed this stuff, and his collaborators. That the stuff that gets expanded upon just feels welcome, frankly. There's not a lot that feels out of sorts with it all. It certainly makes them an even longer sort of visit, but for me it's just a more engaging sort of dive into this world. And especially the second and the third film really do have some major impactful plot points that simply were cut out in order to make a tighter running time. In fact, I'd say the Return of the King in particular, the opening sequence really is desperately needed to actually make that film as coherent and as whole as it's meant to be. And this is the Best Picture winner. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation about whether Return of the King is the best of the three. Really, the Oscar win goes to all three films as a single project, with the last one getting it, and I'm completely fine with that. Return of the King also, independent of it being an extended version, has these endings, so many endings. I think there's 6 or 7 times where it just feels this wrapped up. And again, you're either there or you're not. It's as simple as that. You've either bought into this and you're along for the ride, along for the journey, or you're not. And nothing by the time you get, hour 10 of this film series is going to convince you one way or the other to be sort of part of it. So if that time you're sort of begrudging the fact that we have yet another teary goodbye between a series of hobbits, well, I don't know what to say for you. It's not like cutting 20 minutes out of the end of Return of the King would have suddenly saved it all for you. It just is what it is. It's as simple as that. Anyway, the extended editions brought, at the time, the sort of glory of the home video days, that notion where it felt that we're just, as collectors, we were just getting all of our dream stuff. Peter Jackson himself has talked about numerous times that he had hundreds of laser discs, and on those discs where you have commentary and supplemental materials, he was always really into that. He was a pioneer in some of the web videos back when it was these clunky QuickTime things, but nonetheless a bunch of it actually showed up. So you have on his DVD releases these wonderful boxes that were sort of replicated on the on the Blu-ray set. These are the non-extended versions of the trilogy, which are, again, the way to get them. You actually had to buy it individually, waiting for the expanded set, which carried over so much that was actually on the original DVD extended editions. This is the box set of Blu-rays. Again, another very beautiful set, all set out with the individual discs. And these, on black case, foreshadowing, Blu-rays are the extended edition, which have all of the supplements carried over from the Blu-ray set. And the supplements are insane. There's 2-3 commentaries for the entire running length. There's a commentary with Peter Jackson, a bunch of the cast, and there's a tactical commentary. There's hours and hours and hours of making of footage, behind the scenes elements, interviews with cast and crew, discussions of bringing Tolkien's world to life, the linguistic elements, the armor elements, the historic elements, all there. You basically have something that's 3 or 4 times the running length of all these films in supplemental materials. And it's just this orgy of Lord of the Rings stuff. And I'm not convinced many people have actually gone through it all. I'm the lunatic that has. And sort of every few years, I'd say, 3 or 4 years, I'll sort of gorge on all of this stuff again because I love it. It's as simple as that. That I love the whole notion of getting to understand what it was to make these films and to experience these films not simply as spectacle, but as these sort of further engagement in this narrative that meant so much to me when I was growing up. I mean, the book I would read and reread, and really it wasn't until the films that those books truly came to life. It's as simple as that. As a kid, there's just so much going on. Tolkien's insanity of having the correlation between Sauron and Saruman, and then you get confused about which one's which, especially when there's sort of a switch in allegiance and all this stuff. Again, he has his own proclivities that when you see it visually, rightly or wrongly, it really does bring all those elements together. Now, there's so much that actually gets cut out of the actual Lord of the Rings that comes up in the Hobbit films, and again, that will be a whole nother discussion. But they really did a very good job, I think, of streamlining it and of telling a story as streamlined as you can with 3 epic, giant, crazy films, but nonetheless of bringing us along this voyage, of making us sort of inculcated into the world and bring it up. Now, why are we here discussing? Well, of course, because we have the 4K release of the 3 films. It's a simple box. It's very similar to what we got with the original non-extended version on Blu-ray. It is one of these single things. Again, it's a black case, but it says Ultra HD here. And it's one of these weird cases where you have all of the discs, and all these ones at the beginning are the 3 discs of the regular version, and behind you have 2 discs each for the extended version. So this is the sort of simple way of getting on 4K all the films in both regular, theatrical, and extended version all in one shot. They're doing the same set for The Hobbit. As I said, we'll discuss that when it actually arrives. But nonetheless, this is it. If what you want is the movies, this is what you've got. Now, Warner is planning a giant set that includes not only, from what I understand, not only all of the insanity of this, but even more retrospective discussions. All the elements come together. In fact, I think it will have both Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit in one giant ass set coming. Details were provided, but they're shifting. Again, we're living in strange and interesting times. They were pretty good at letting us know that that stuff's coming. So if you want to wait, I guess you can wait. I am, have the privilege already to have it, and just to see what the thing looks like. The video and the audio will be pretty much identical. That was the other thing I should actually point out as I'm bouncing back and forth, is that this was a theatrical, but they did a much better job with the audio of this. I believe this was a higher level of, if I recall, DTS. On this set that actually gave not only the commentaries, but actually gave a more robust soundscape, but also because it was split into 2 discs, the actual video bit rate was higher. This is much less of an issue now, obviously, with UHD and the way that it works. But I will say, having watched again what I threw in right away, because this arrived today, I threw in the prologue. It looks gorgeous. We knew we were going to get something quite spectacular once you get it. And we emphasize this over and over again. It has less to do with it being in 4K and almost everything to do with it being in a form of HDR, Dolby Vision, or whatever. And that with a greater color space, everything becomes clearer because you have more colors in order to tell the story, as it were. All the gradients, all the beautiful flesh tones, the articulation. What I found just remarkable, as silly as it is, it's while he's holding the finger of Sauron as it crumbles into dust and the ring is there, all the details on the leather glove are just pristine. It's just gorgeous because you're now getting the soft delineation that was always there on the celluloid as scanned, the sort of full bit rate, much closer to the theatrical experience than any Blu-ray can actually accommodate. This is the big thing about 4K. You can watch 4K even on a small television that actually accepts the signal, and if it's properly calibrated, as this one is, the 77 LG OLED that's behind me, you are going to get stunning color representation, amazing highs, amazing blacks, amazing delineation between all the colors. And that's for me what's so exciting. I have it's December 2020. It's such a weird year. I think I'm going to enjoy celebrating, taking hours and hours to sort of dive into this. I'm greatly looking forward to the big set when it finally comes out so that I can dive in again. But for right now, it's just it's a time to remember that these Lord of the Rings films have sort of occupied a very strange place, sort of, I think, in cinema history. Is they're thought of in some ways as just a thing of the past by some people, or simply something that's just an entertainment. And I think if you really dive into it, you really see that there's quite a bit of sophisticated filmmaking at play here. There's some incredible technical achievements, of course, but there's also some pretty stunning narrative achievements as well. The translation from book to film that was done here, I think, is among the best of an untranslatable book. There were so many pitfalls that they had to overcome, so many ways that this simply would not have worked, and as far as I'm concerned, these really, really do shine. They truly stand up as films for the ages, and some of the truly the greatest epic filmmaking simply ever done in cinematic history. I was so ecstatic when it won Best Picture, not because, you know, the Oscar race necessarily means lots of not particularly great films have won Best Picture, but in some ways it really did reward for some of those people that won a gazillion Oscars, some of those people that were along for this journey. Would I have loved for The Hobbit to have been Guillermo del Toro's vision? That's a whole nother story which we can deal with another time. But for Lord of the Rings, this is absolutely Peter Jackson and Philippa and all the other people that actually contributed to it. The massive number of artists and artisans and actors and people who were hired and fired, and everything that made these films what they are. They're of a time and they are timeless, and I really can't wait to dive into them in 4K. For ThatShelf.com, I'm Jason Gorber. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, please ring the bell so you'll hear about our next video, and we'll see you next time. All the best. Take care.